I sit in my cell, surrounded by the stench of sweat and filth. The sounds of shouting and pounding on metal fill the air, making it nearly impossible to think. I'm scared, constantly on edge, and feeling the pressure of this life bearing down on me. I was convicted of a crime I did not commit, but the evidence was stacked against me, and the jury found me guilty. I was thrown into this hellhole, a place where I am constantly pushed and shoved by other prisoners. The nights are the worst. The shaking of the bars as the deranged prisoners pound on them, the angry shouting and cursing that never seems to stop, and the fear that any moment could be my last. I have seen the violence in this place, the beatings and the hard, cold cell floors stained with blood. I'm a caged-like animal, with no windows to the outside world and no hope of escape. I have tried to keep my sanity, to hold on to the person I once was, but it is becoming more and more difficult with each passing day. The conditions here are inhumane, the air thick with the stench of decay, and the constant noise driving me to the brink of madness. I am surviving, but barely. The thought of spending the rest of my life in this cage is a constant weight on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I pray for release, for justice, but it seems that hope is a luxury I can no longer afford. I am trapped in this prison, surrounded by the worst of humanity, and I fear that I too will become just like them. The lines between right and wrong are becoming blurred, and I am scared that I will not be able to hold on to my humanity for much longer. I was always somewhat of a wild child, always looking for a good time and never thinking about the consequences. But that all changed one night when I was arrested for drunk driving. I was so drunk that I couldn't even remember getting behind the wheel, and the police found me passed out in the car with an open bottle of whiskey on the passenger seat. When I sobered up, I was taken to jail, and I was in for a rude awakening. The cells were dirty and cramped, the guards were mean and always shouting, and the other prisoners were even worse. They were a rough crowd, and I was quickly outnumbered. I tried to keep to myself, but that only made things worse. The other prisoners started taunting me, hollering and spitting in my direction. I was way in over my head, and I knew it. I was facing serious charges and a very long sentence, and I was completely alone. I tried to argue with the police, but they wouldn't listen to me. I lied to them, telling them that I wasn't drunk, that I had just fallen asleep in the car. But it was no use. They had all the evidence that they needed. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. I was transferred to a maximum security prison and put on death row. I was surrounded by the worst of the worst, and I was scared out of my mind. Every night I would lie in my cell, listening to the sounds of the other prisoners shouting, laughing, and psyching each other out. But then, something strange happened. A new prisoner was brought in. He was a big man with mean eyes and a rough demeanor. But for some reason, he took a liking to me. He showed me the ropes and taught me how to survive in prison. I was grateful for his help, and I started to feel like I had a shot at making it out of here alive. However, I quickly realized that my new friend was not what he seemed. He was playing me, using me to get what he wanted. One night he set me up, and I was beaten within an inch of my life. I was left lying on the floor, broken and bloody, with the other prisoners just laughing and shouting insults at me. From that day on, I was a changed man. I had seen the worst that the world had to offer, and I knew that I never wanted to go back to that place again. I served my time, but the scars of my time in prison will never fully heal. I will never forget the shouting and the hollering, and especially the spitting, and I will never forget the mean eyes of the man who changed my life forever. To this day, I still have trust issues and struggle to fall asleep at night. One day I was assigned to cover a story about a notorious prison in my area. The prison was known for its high security measures and was considered one of the most secure facilities in the country. As I entered the prison, I noticed a man who had just come in from a different newspaper. He was dressed in a suit and was carrying a briefcase. I assumed he was there for some kind of business, but little did I know, this man was actually a devious ex-convict who had managed to deceive everyone with his disguise. The man approached me and introduced himself as a freelance photographer who was there to cover the story with me. He said that he needed the money and that he was a professional in his field. At first, I was intrigued by this man, and so decided to work with him. As we started to work on the story, I quickly realized that this man was very intelligent. However, I started to notice a few odd details. There was something about his glasses and his moustache that just didn't look right, and his hair always seemed to look the same, but nonetheless, he was still very convincing in his disguise, and at no point did I ever think about potentially asking him if he had a wig or if these were his real glasses. So we continued to explore the prison. I couldn't shake the feeling, though, that something was off about this man. I decided to do some digging and discovered that he was actually an ex-convict who had served time in the same prison that we were covering. I found this interesting, and after further reading, I realized that he had lied about his identity, and it was now clear to me that he was using his skills to gain access to sensitive information. I was horrified and immediately reported what I had found to the authorities. The man was then arrested and taken back into custody. It turned out that he had a devious plan to break out of the prison and had been using his disguise to gather information that would help his escape. I was shocked, although I wasn't too surprised. This experience taught me to always be vigilant and to trust my instincts. I learnt that people can be deceptive, and that it's important to always do your own research before trusting anyone. 30 years ago, I was sent to prison for a crime that I'd rather not go into too much detail about. Let's just say there was a woman who unfortunately lost her life, and I was to blame. The prison I was sent to was known to be one of the harshest and most inhumane in the country. The air was thick with the smell of fear and desperation, and every day felt like a living nightmare. I had a few friends in there with me though, and we tried to stick it out together and support each other. But the prison, it was designed to break us apart. The guards would constantly try to turn us against each other, offering us privileges if we ratted on each other. But we were stronger than that. We held on to our friendship like a lifeline. There was this one time, a fellow prisoner managed to smuggle in a piece of paper and a pen. He passed it to me and whispered, "Pass it on." The note had a message written on it. It was a set of coordinates and a basic salary. I didn't know what it meant at first, but I passed it on to the next person as instructed. The next day I was in the kitchen, working, when I heard a loud smash. I turned around to see one of my friends, covered in blood, frantically waving a weapon around. He had broken one of the plates and used a shard to stab one of the guards. The other prisoners were in a state of panic. Cutlery was scattered all over the place, and the blood was everywhere. I was frozen with fear as I watched my friend being taken down by the other guards. He was screaming. I had to do it. I later found out that the coordinates on the note were a location where a weapon was hidden, and the basic salary was an amount of money that was meant to be paid to whoever retrieved it. The victim of the attack, unfortunately, died, and my friend was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The reality of life in prison hit me like a ton of bricks. The thought of spending the rest of my days in this place filled me with dread. I learnt a lesson that day, to never take my friendship with other prisoners for granted. We stuck together, and we continued to stick together and watch each other's backs. That was the only way we were ever going to survive in that hellhole. The prison may have broken us physically, but it could never break our spirits. And here I am today, a free man. Unfortunately, none of my friends made it out. But there are a few that are still alive, and I'll send a note every once in a while. I have been a tenant now, as a prisoner in a maximum security prison, for the last 10 years, serving time for a crime that I, of course, didn't commit. After all, everyone that's in prison is innocent, right? Every day is a living nightmare. There's an evil guard who enjoys tormenting and beating all of us. I often find solace in the moments where I'm actually able to light a cigarette and blow out the smoke, as if it were a way of letting go of the fear and anxiety that consumes me every day. But even those moments are taken away from me. I remember a time when the guard caught me and made me line up with the other prisoners, and then proceeded to throw rocks at us until we started to bleed. I was filled with a burning desire for revenge, and eventually, I finally got my chance. I managed to knock the guard out and took him as a hostage, threatening to torture him if he didn't confess to his wrongdoings. He begged and pleaded for forgiveness, but I wasn't ready to let him off the hook just yet. After what felt like hours of pleading and bargaining, the guard finally admitted to his crimes and I let him go. The word spread quickly and he was fired from the prison for the way he was treating us prisoners, and he never worked in a correctional facility again. But I was given an extra 10 years on top of my sentence, so every day I wonder whether or not it was worth it. But I tell you this, it felt good. I was one of those prisoners that had always been in and out of prison for years. I would serve my time, get out, and then within a few weeks, sure enough, I'd be caught for another crime and thrown back behind bars. But this time was different. I was determined to escape and clear my name. One night, I managed to slip out of my cell and make my way to the perimeter of the prison. I ran as fast as I could, not looking back until I was far away from the prison walls. I knew the police would be after me, so I needed to find a place to hide. I stumbled upon a laundry room and quickly climbed into a basket full of dirty clothes, pulling the lid over me. I could hear the sirens getting closer, and my heart was pounding in my chest. I could feel the vibrations of the police cars as they drove by, but thankfully, they didn't stop. As soon as the coast was clear, I made a break for it. I stole a car and started driving as fast as I could, trying to put as much distance between me and the prison as possible. But the rain was coming down in sheets and the roads were slick. I could hear the sirens getting closer, and I knew I was running out of time. I was driving too fast, skidding around corners and almost losing control of the car. I was so scared that I was shaking, but I kept going. I looked back in my rearview mirror and saw the police cars closing in on me. I pressed the gas pedal to the floor, but it was no use. They were gaining on me, and there was nothing I could do. Just as I thought I was going to be caught, a truck appeared out of nowhere and slammed into the side of my car. The impact sent me spinning out of control, and I hit a guardrail. I was unable to move. The police cars pulled up behind me, and I knew it was over. I was arrested and taken back to prison. I was charged with manslaughter for the truck driver's death, and my sentence was extended. I was sad and defeated, knowing that I would be behind bars for the rest of my life, but at least I had tried, and that was something. I was once a prisoner, locked away in a maximum security prison for a crime I didn't commit. The place was known for its brutal conditions and the harsh treatment of its inmates. Every day was a struggle for survival. I spent my days working in the workshop, trying to pass the time as best I could. But even that was dangerous, with inmates forming gangs and fighting over the most trivial of things. I kept to myself, trying not to draw attention, but I was small and weak, and that made me an easy target for the stronger, more aggressive inmates. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, fearful of the next attack. One day, while I was in the library trying to escape my troubles, I heard a commotion coming from outside. I cautiously approached the door and peered through the tiny window. To my horror, I saw several escapees splashing through the puddles, exchanging punches with the guards. I was paralyzed with fear, wondering if they would come for me next. But then I heard a voice behind me.
"Come on, we need to get out of here."
It was one of my enemies, offering me a chance to escape. I didn't trust him, but I didn't have much choice. We made our way to the prison yard, dodging guards and ducking behind buildings. I'm not sure what drove me to do it. Maybe after all those years locked away, I couldn't help but jump at the chance to escape, even though I knew it wasn't going to end well. Nevertheless, eventually we made it to the fence, and I scrambled over it as fast as I could. I was free, but I was also scared. I didn't know what laid ahead, but I was determined to start a new life and leave my past behind. So here I am. I'm still on the run, but my life hasn't been as glamorous as I'd hoped. Every day I'm peering over my shoulder. Every day is another struggle for survival. Just like when I was in prison. I wouldn't wish this life for my worst enemy, but if I am caught, I fear what the police will do to me. Maybe this time I won't be locked away. Maybe this time my life will really be in danger. As a child, I had a very difficult upbringing, marked by a strained relationship with my stepfather and bullying by my peers. But I was intelligent and learned to use my wit and charm to get what I wanted. I excelled in school and even developed a series of seemingly normal relationships with women. But behind that facade, there was a monster lurking. In the 1970s, I travelled across the country, leaving a trail of death and destruction in my wake. I sexually assaulted and murdered young women in Washington, Oregon, Colorado, Utah, and Florida. I was careful not to leave any evidence behind, and for a while it seemed as if I was invincible. My first murder occurred in 1974. That was in Washington. I remember I lured a young woman named Linda Ann Healy from her bedroom window and strangled her to death. Her body was never found, and over the next year I continued to target young women, using my charm and intelligence to gain their trust before attacking them. In Utah, I brutally assaulted and killed 2 women in a single night. The first was a teenage girl named Nancy, whom I had abducted while she was riding her bike. The second was a woman named Melissa Smith, who I had beaten and strangled to death. In Colorado, I attacked a group of women in their college dormitory, bludgeoning several of them to death. One of my victims, Karen Campbell, was only 23 years old. I took her to a remote location where I raped and killed her. In Florida, I continued my reign of terror. I attacked several women at a sorority house in Florida State University, killing 2 of them and leaving 2 others with permanent injuries. I then abducted and killed a 12-year-old girl named Kimberly Leach, leaving her body in a wooded area. Despite my best efforts, however, to avoid detection, I eventually made enough mistakes that led to my capture. I was pulled over by police in Utah, and they found suspicious items in my car. I was eventually linked to the murders in Washington, Utah, and Colorado, and I was then extradited to Florida to face charges for the killings there.
During my trial, I attempted to manipulate the jury with my charm and intelligence, even serving as my own lawyer at one point. But I was ultimately convicted of multiple counts of murder and sentenced to death. Even as I sat on death row, I knew that my legacy would live on. My case inspired a series of popular novels and films, and I became something of a celebrity. But I also knew that my actions had caused immeasurable pain and suffering to the families of my victims. Once I finally passed, I could only hope that my death would bring them some measure of closure and peace. So be warned, my friends, that there are monsters in the world, hiding in plain sight. They may seem charming and intelligent, but they are nothing more than predators, just waiting for their next victim. Don't let them get too close, or you may never escape their grasp.
Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next video.